At my brother's promotion party, he stood tall in front of the crowd glass, raised the city skyline glowing behind him like a personal spotlight. His grin stretched wide, effortless, as if success was just something that had always belonged to him. Then, with that familiar charm that made people lean in, he said, "I'm the successful one in the family." A pause. My sister, she just cleans houses. The laughter that followed wasn't the nervous, awkward kind you hope for when someone tells a bad joke. No, this was genuine, full-bodied, the kind that fills a room and lingers, each chuckle landing like a slap. My face flushed with a heat that spread from my cheeks down to my chest. Slowly, heads turned, eyes seeking me out, some with the polite sympathy of people who pitied me most, with smug little smirks as if they'd been waiting for the punchline. I had become it. There I stood in a room drenched in expensive cologne, clinking champagne flutes and conversations that sounded more like LinkedIn profiles than human interaction. Corporate pride filled the air, thick and suffocating, and across the polished floors by the tall windows was my daughter Sophie. She held her juice box with both hands, small fingers wrapped tight, staring right at me. She had heard it too. Before I could process the sting, the elevator chimed. Heads turned as the polished metal doors slid open. Out stepped a woman in a sleek black dress that seemed to command the very air around her. Every movement was deliberate, her heels tapping against the marble with sharp confidence. Shoulders back, chin slightly lifted, she was a walking masterclass in presence. Whispers rippled through the crowd. People straightened their postures, smoothing ties and adjusting cuffs as if her gaze might land on them next. But she wasn't looking at them. She found me instantly. With a subtle but unmistakable gesture, she pointed in my direction. "Meet your new manager," she announced, her voice smooth as velvet, but with the weight of authority that stopped conversations mid-sentence. In an instant, the room's laughter died. Just like that, the air shifted. Conversations halted. Glasses hovered mid-air, and for the first time all night, every single eye was on me, but not with mockery. Truth be told, I hadn't even wanted to be there. That invitation sat untouched on my kitchen counter for a whole week, its glossy cardstock and gold-trimmed edges mocking me each time I walked past. It screamed corporate celebration, the kind of event I had no business attending. But it was for Brandon. My older brother had just been promoted to regional sales director at one of those gleaming tech firms in downtown Chicago. Big title, bigger party. Rooftop venue with a skyline view, open bar, catered food, the works. Mom, of course, insisted I go. "It's important for the family, Allie," she said, pressing the invitation into my hand like it was a family duty. Family. That word has always been tangled in knots for us. Growing up, Brandon was the golden boy. Star athlete, top of his class, full-ride scholarship. People used to say he was destined for greatness before we even hit high school. Me, I was the quiet one. A little shy, more at ease, organizing the pantry than working a crowd. I loved helping in the kitchen, getting lost in a good book, finding calm in tidy spaces. I didn't have Brandon's effortless charm. I was just Allison. Life threw its curveballs. I had Sophie when I was 24. Her father didn't stick around long enough to meet her. Bills piled up and I had to figure things out fast. What started as cleaning a few houses to make ends meet became something steadier, more reliable. One client turned into two, two into 10. Eventually, I was training others, building a team. But I never talked about that with my family. They still pictured me scrubbing floors for pocket change, barely scraping by. And I let them. Maybe it was easier to let them believe it than to explain how much I had built. How proud I was of it. So there I stood that Saturday evening outside a rooftop lounge that probably cost more to rent than my entire payroll for the month. My dress was navy blue, bought secondhand, but tailored by my own hands until it fit just right. Still, as I glanced around, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was a visitor in someone else's world. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with soft music, the gentle clinking of glassware, and conversations peppered with words like equity exit strategy and IPO. Every handshake felt like a transaction. Brandon naturally was the star of the evening. He floated from group to group, dishing out perfect smiles and shoulder pats, his gray suit tailored to perfection, his shoes gleaming under the lights. When he spotted me, his grin widened. He strode over, pulling me into a one-armed hug. "Hey, you actually made it. That's surprising," he said, his tone as casual as if we'd bumped into each other at the grocery store. Not thanks for coming, not glad you're here. Just surprising. Before I could reply, our parents appeared. Mom pulled me into a tight embrace. You look beautiful, sweetheart, she whispered before adding in a softer tone. Try to be social tonight, okay? Dad gave me his usual nod, his approval as brief as ever. Glad you came. Brandon's doing really well, he said, as if I needed the reminder. I gave a polite smile, but inside I felt myself shrink just a little. Across the room, Sophie stood by the buffet table, dressed in a pink sundress and white sneakers, sipping her juice box like a little adult. She waved at me, her smile a small island of comfort in a sea of polished strangers. For most of the evening, I stayed near the edges, nursing a soda, offering polite nods, listening as people swapped corporate war stories. Nobody asked what I did. Nobody cared. Every now and then I caught glimpses of Brandon, basking in attention. I couldn't help but remember when we were kids how fiercely he used to defend me. But somewhere along the way, I had become an afterthought. The embarrassing sibling. The one who never quite made it. Tonight was his moment. I wasn't here to disrupt that. I had come to be supportive, to smile, to keep the peace. But life had other plans. An hour in, I'd perfected the art of small talk avoidance. Sophie was getting tired. I had checked my watch at least a dozen times, waiting for a polite moment to slip away unnoticed. And then the unmistakable chime of a glass being tapped cut through the hum of conversation. I turned to see Brandon standing by the DJ booth, drink in hand, his smile wide, his eyes gleaming with that brand of confidence you either earn or fake well enough to pull off. Hey everyone, he called out, his voice cutting through the rooftop breeze. Before we get too tipsy and start embarrassing ourselves on the dance floor, I just wanted to say thank you. Polite applause followed. He launched into his speech with all the right corporate buzzwords: grind, hustle, grateful, blessed. Words that made people nod and smile, words I'd heard 1,000 times, but rarely believed. From my spot by the railing, arms crossed, I watched. Half listening, half hoping Sophie wouldn't get bored and start tugging at my dress. Half wishing this night would just quietly end. Brandon's voice slipped into that familiar, honeyed cadence, the same performative charm he reserved for family dinners and boardroom presentations alike. He knew how to play a crowd, how to make them lean in, how to draw their laughter as easily as pulling a rabbit from a hat. And tonight he was in his element. I want to take a moment to thank my family, he announced, flashing that polished smile that had never quite reached his eyes when it came to me. First, my parents. My dad, who taught me the value of hard work. My mom, who always kept me grounded. I couldn't have done any of this without you. The room responded on cue. Applause rippled through the air, gentle and obliging. Mom, seated near the front, dabbed her eyes with a cocktail napkin, her lips trembling in a smile so proud it hurt to look at. She had always loved the spectacle of success. Dad gave his measured nod, the same one he offered at Little League games and graduation ceremonies, approval packaged in minimalist form. Then Brandon paused. A master of timing, he let the moment stretch, his smile sharpening just enough to draw blood. And of course, he added, his gaze sweeping the crowd like a spotlight searching for its final act. My little sister Allison. She's here tonight, too. The pivot was subtle but surgical. My breath hitched as the weight of 100 eyes sought me out, peeling back the thin veneer I'd wrapped myself in. Brandon's grin widened, glinting with the ease of someone who had never questioned his place at the top. She's had a different path than me, he said, the words sliding out slow, deliberate each syllable, a polite scalpel. I run regional sales. She runs a cleaning service. A hush fell, the kind that's not quite silence, but rather a collective breath being held, the tension stretched so thin it could snap at any moment. My jaw clenched. My fingers curled tighter around my glass. She's the one in the family who makes sure the floors sparkle and the windows shine. So if anyone spills tonight, don't worry. She's got it covered. Laughter erupted, not the brittle, embarrassed kind that hopes to soften a blow, but real laughter. Full-throated. Unapologetic. It rolled across the rooftop, a living thing that wrapped itself around me, squeezing until it became hard to breathe. Some faces turned away, pretending not to see the spectacle unfold. Others glanced at me with that particular brand of pity that stings worse than mockery, a fleeting sympathetic flicker that said, "Yikes, glad it's not me." My skin burned. I couldn't quite tell what expression my face was making, if I was smiling, grimacing, or simply frozen, but my body felt pinned in place, a butterfly on a collector's board. 8 years old again, teased in front of the whole class, too stunned to speak, too small to fight back. Brandon raised his glass lazily. But seriously, thanks for being here, Allison. Love you. The words floated out casual and weightless, as if love was a seasoning sprinkled for flavor, not a truth to be felt. I risked a glance toward my parents. Mom studied her lap intently, fingers fussing with the hem of her dress. Dad, ever the stoic, sipped his whiskey, his gaze fixed on the skyline as though the city might offer him an escape route from this awkward scene. And then there was Sophie. My daughter stood by the dessert table, her small hand, frozen midair, half a cookie forgotten between her fingers. Her wide, solemn eyes locked onto mine, confused, questioning. That look pierced deeper than Brandon's words ever could. The laughter ebbed, conversations resumed, and Brandon continued his speech. But his words washed over me muffled, as if I'd slipped beneath the surface of some invisible current. The ache in my chest wasn't born of his insult. It was the casualness of it, the way it fit so easily into the script of the evening, so readily accepted by everyone in that room. They saw me as nothing more than the girl who never made it, the sister who cleaned houses. They had no idea. No idea that I had built a business with my own 2 hands. 14 employees, 27 regular clients, contracts with commercial spaces, real estate firms, even a luxury gym chain. I had developed systems, managed payrolls, negotiated contracts, all without investors, all without applause. My company ran on grit and late nights and a vision only I could see. But none of that mattered here, not against the weight of a title, a salary, a company credit card, not in Brandon's world. The walls felt closer now, the air thinner. I needed space. Without a word, I slipped from the crowd, each step measured but urgent, crossing the rooftop toward the elevator as though it might be a lifeboat. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just moved. As the elevator doors whispered shut behind me, the party's clinking glasses and polished laughter became a muted murmur, as if sealed in a snow globe of someone else's life. I pressed my back against the cool wall phone, in hand fingers hesitating over the familiar name. "Victoria," I said when she answered, my voice low but steady. "I know this is last minute, but are you still planning to come?" A pause, brief but solid, then her voice warm and unwavering. "I'm 2 blocks away. Be there in 5. The call ended, but her words remained wrapping around me like a promise. In that moment, standing in the elevator's dim reflection, I took in my appearance. My dress still neat, still fitting well after all my second-hand tailoring. My hair smoothed into place, not a strand out of line. On the outside, I looked composed. On the inside, I felt cracked open. For years, I had shrunk myself to fit into the spaces my family allowed me. It was easier to let them underestimate me than to expend the energy correcting them. I told myself my work would speak for itself. That real power didn't need an audience. But tonight, Sophie had seen it all, and that changed everything. I wouldn't let her grow up thinking her mother was someone to be laughed at. That success only came with a corner office and a brass nameplate. A soft chime announced Victoria's arrival downstairs. I glanced at the message she sent, "Parking now." It was a simple text, but it carried weight. Victoria Reynolds wasn't just a wealthy client. She was a force. The first day I cleaned her home, she asked me how I organized my team. Not out of idle curiosity, but with genuine interest. She listened. She advised. And in time, she became my mentor, not with grand gestures, but with consistent, quiet support. 2 weeks ago, she had offered me an operations manager role for her company's new Chicago branch. Full salary, benefits, growth. At the time, I had hesitated. Self-doubt is a stubborn shadow. But not tonight. Tonight, that hesitation evaporated. Straightening my shoulders, I turned back toward the rooftop. As the door slid open, the city's night air greeted me crisp and unapologetic. Sophie stood near the railing, her gaze lifted skyward, tiny fingers tracing the outlines of constellations only she could see. I knelt beside her, the city's hum filling the space between us. "Hey, baby, you okay?" She nodded slowly, but her brow furrowed. "Why did Uncle Brandon say that about you?" I paused, weighing my words, careful not to let bitterness spill into her wide, wondering eyes. "Sometimes people don't understand what others are going through. Or what they've built," I said quietly. "But you work really hard," she insisted, the simplicity of her truth cutting through years of noise. "I do," I smiled, brushing a stray hair from her cheek. "And that's what matters. But tonight, I want you to see something." "What?" "Just watch." Hand in hand, we stepped back into the lion's den. I didn't march in defiantly, nor did I slink in unnoticed. I walked steadily head high, posture sure. Some eyes flicked toward me, then away, embarrassed by their own earlier laughter. Brandon didn't notice. He was busy holding court near the bar, entertaining his circle of colleagues with the same charm that had just reduced me to a joke. And then there she was. Victoria Reynolds stepped out of the elevator like she was born to own the space. Her movements were fluid, unhurried, yet every step seemed to echo with intent. She wore a deep, sapphire blazer over a sleek black dress, her heels clicking against the floor like the punctuation to a statement nobody had dared make yet. Heads turned in synchronized curiosity, a subtle ripple of movement that swept across the rooftop like a shift in the wind. Conversations faltered mid-sentence, glasses paused mid-air as the elevator delivered a woman whose mere presence seemed to pull the evening's gravity toward her. Victoria Reynolds stepped forward, the soft click of her heels resonating against the marble like deliberate punctuation marks. With every step, the atmosphere recalibrated itself, as if the room collectively remembered how to breathe, but only on her terms. Brandon's face caught the light as he glanced up, his confident mask flickering for the briefest moment. Recognition dawned slowly, his practiced smile tightening at the edges. He might not have known why Victoria Reynolds, CEO of Vantage Corporate Solutions, was gracing his party, but he knew who she was. Everyone did. Only weeks before her company had inked a multi-million-dollar partnership with Brandon's firm, and her influence stretched across boardrooms like an invisible empire. Victoria offered polite nods, gracious but detached, as if acknowledging distant acquaintances at an opera. Her path was clear, unwavering, as she walked past the bar, slicing through the crowd's whispered speculations, and made her way directly to me. For a heartbeat, I forgot how to breathe. "Allison?" She greeted, her voice warm, but anchored in that unshakable calm that silenced lesser storms. She extended a hand, her grip firm, her eyes sharper than any polite smile could mask. "It's good to see you." I took her hand without hesitation, matching her firmness, drawing strength from the certainty in her gaze. "It's good to see you, too. Thank you for coming." Another smile, a fraction deeper, and then she turned, pivoting toward the audience, who now stood suspended in collective anticipation. Raising her voice just enough to glide over the murmurs, she said, "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." The effect was immediate. Conversations halted. The low pulse of music faded into the background, an afterthought. The hush was absolute, the kind of silence that feels alive, thrumming beneath the skin. In that moment, I knew everything was about to shift. Victoria took the center of the room, her poise effortless, a stillness more commanding than any grand gesture. Brandon's drink lowered incrementally, his smile faltering under the weight of unspoken questions. His eyes flickered from me to her confusion, knitting his brow as if struggling to rearrange the pieces of a puzzle whose final image he'd never considered. She didn't make him wait. "I'd like to take just a moment," Victoria began, her voice a perfect balance of velvet and steel, "to recognize someone who is about to play a pivotal role in our company's future." She let the words linger, suspended like a held breath, before turning toward me with the precision of a seasoned orator. "Allison Brooks, meet your new operations manager." The gasp was audible, a sharp intake of disbelief. Ripples of surprise spread through the crowd, the undercurrent of whispers rising into a crest of murmured incredulity. A woman near the hors d'oeuvres table dropped her glass. The delicate stem hit the floor with a crystalline crack, punctuating the moment as if scripted. Brandon's head snapped toward me, his mouth twitching into a smile far too brittle to hold. "Wait. What?" He chuckled, but the sound was strained hollow. "Allison, are you sure you've got the right person?" Victoria's expression didn't waver. I'm quite certain she said, the corners of her mouth curving in a smile that was equal parts grace and quiet triumph. Addressing the crowd once more, her tone softened, but the words landed with precision. "Allison isn't just a new manager. She is a business owner, a leader in every sense of the word. She built her cleaning company from nothing while raising her daughter on her own. 14 employees, commercial contracts, no investors. Every dollar earned through sheer determination and strategy." A subtle shift passed through the room. The dynamic recalibrated curiosity, mingling with embarrassment, admiration, threading its way through the earlier mockery. The whispers faded as attention sharpened, focused now not on Victoria's authority, but on me. "I first met Allison when she came to clean my home. Victoria continued her tone, conversational, yet heavy with significance. Within 10 minutes, I was asking her for advice. And as time went on, I realized I wasn't just speaking to someone hardworking, I was speaking to a strategist, someone who understands systems leadership, and people in a way many executives struggle to grasp. She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle before turning back to me, her gaze unwavering. You earned this, Allison. I'm proud to have you on my team. The applause was hesitant at first, like a tentative wave meeting an unfamiliar shore. A few claps scattered through the crowd, unsure but respectful. Then slowly the momentum built, clap by clap, until the room filled with the undeniable sound of acknowledgement. With each echoing clap, Brandon seemed to diminish his presence, shrinking, as the narrative he'd built unraveled before his very eyes. He stepped forward, attempting to reclaim some semblance of control, his smile reassembled but fragile. Wow, I had no idea you were working with Victoria. You didn't say anything. I met his gaze steady and unflinching. You never asked. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time that evening, Brandon had no clever retort, no deflecting joke. Just the brittle quiet of a man confronted with a version of reality he hadn't considered. Across the room, my mother stood near a high-top table, her hand pressed to her mouth, her eyes glistening. My father, ever stoic, looked away, fingers rubbing the back of his neck in a rare display of unease. And Sophie, my sweet, wide-eyed Sophie, was positively luminous. Her small hand found mine, her smile wide and radiant. I bent down, my voice soft but certain. That's the woman who offered me the new job, I whispered. Sophie's eyes widened. She picked you? No, baby, I said, squeezing her hand gently. I earned it. Victoria's smile touched her eyes as she offered Sophie a knowing nod before gracefully rejoining a circle of executives who now looked at me with a new lens, their earlier amusement replaced with measured respect. I didn't gloat. There was no need for raised voices or triumphant proclamations. The truth was loud enough on its own. For the first time in my life I had been seen. The remainder of the evening blurred into polite introductions, half-hearted apologies, and genuine curiosity. I accepted each with grace, but stayed close to Sophie. This moment, as much as it was mine, was also for her. Before we left, Brandon approached again, his bravado stripped to something quieter, almost human. Look, Allison, I didn't mean anything by the joke. It wasn't a joke, I interrupted gently, but firmly. It was a reminder of who you think I am. But that's not who I am anymore. He had no answer for that. Just a nod, a glance downward, and a quiet step aside. Sophie's fingers intertwined with mine as we made our way toward the elevator. Inside the quiet carriage of polished metal and glass, she squeezed my hand again. Mom. Yeah! I'm going to tell everyone at school my mom's a boss now. I smiled, the weight of the evening dissolving into something light, something real. Tell them I've always been one. The morning sunlight slanted through my kitchen window, catching motes of dust in golden beams. I stood at the stove, flipping pancakes, not out of necessity, but out of simple, joyful choice. Victory didn't always arrive in grand moments. Sometimes it was found in the sizzle of batter and the quiet rhythm of a spatula. Sophie sat at the table, the glittery clip from the night before, still pinned in her hair, watching me with a new kind of curiosity, as though seeing her mother for the first time. "Does everyone at the party work for you now?" she asked, her voice bright. I laughed, shaking my head. Not everyone. But I'm their manager now. That means I help lead a team. She nodded, satisfied. I think you should wear a cape. I'll think about it. I replied, though, in truth, I didn't need one. What I had was far better. Respect not given but earned. Not just from them, but from myself. That night hadn't changed me. It had revealed me. Every early morning, every deal brokered in coffee shops, every hard-won paycheck had been laying the bricks of the woman who now stood tall in her own skin. I used to think humility meant hiding. That modesty was about shrinking to fit other people's comfort. But now I understood humility is quiet strength, not silence. And confidence. Confidence is simply the truth spoken, without apology. Victoria's words, "meet your new manager," hadn't just silenced a room. That moment when Victoria pointed to me with quiet authority and named me not as the sister who cleans houses, but as an operations manager, a leader, did more than hush a room. It shattered a belief I had been dragging behind me for years. Like an ill-fitting coat, that belief clung to me heavy and stifling the lie that success had a certain look, a certain sound, a family-approved shape. It doesn't. Success isn't the title on your business card. It isn't the square footage of your office or the company logo embroidered on your polo shirt. Success is choosing not to give up when no one claps for you. It's building something from splinters and grit when the world keeps stepping over you. Success is showing up even when they treat you like the help and quietly proving you're so much more. In the days after that rooftop night, life didn't erupt in grand gestures. There were no parades, no headlines proclaiming my victory. Instead, the change came in softer, smaller ways. My mother called me. For the first time in a long while, her words weren't dipped in duty or wrapped in thinly veiled disappointment. Her voice was quiet, almost fragile. "Allison, I'm sorry," she said, breath hitching on the words. "We didn't see how hard you were working. We thought we knew who you were. We were wrong." She cried. I cried. The years between us filled with assumptions and unspoken hurts didn't vanish, but they thinned just enough for something resembling truth to pass through. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. My father didn't call. That wasn't his way. But a week later, he appeared at my apartment door a little more stooped than I remembered, holding 2 overstuffed bags of groceries. He didn't offer a speech. He simply placed them on the counter, took in the small kitchen with its clean lines and worn but loved countertops, and asked, "How's the new job going?" It's hard, I admitted, watching the way his hands fidgeted with a can of beans. But it's good. He nodded once, that familiar, understated gesture, and said, "I'm proud of you. Nothing more, nothing less." And somehow it was enough. As for Brandon, the brother whose careless words had once sliced so easily, there were no dramatic apologies, no midnight calls of reconciliation. But through a mutual friend, I heard whispers. He wasn't making as many jokes lately. Perhaps he was thinking. Perhaps not. Either way, I'd come to understand that was no longer my burden to carry. What I know now is simple. You don't have to explain your worth to people committed to misunderstanding it. You don't have to fold yourself smaller just to fit within the narrow frame of their expectations. Their comfort is not your responsibility. And sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't a well-rehearsed comeback or a mic drop moment. Sometimes it's simply undeniable growth. Now, when I walk into meetings at Victoria's company, I do so with my head high, not because I crave validation, but because I no longer apologize for the space I occupy. We talk about operations, leadership pipelines, long-term strategies, real weighty conversations where my voice holds weight. No one asks if I'm there to clean the floors, and even if they did, I wouldn't flinch. I built something from nothing, and I will never be ashamed of that. I still run my cleaning business part-time. Letting it go would feel like erasing the foundation beneath my feet. It's where I learned to lead, to problem solve, to stand my ground. That business taught me more about resilience than any MBA ever could. Sophie, ever my fiercest little champion, announced to her entire second-grade class that her mom runs not 1 but 2 businesses. Her teacher emailed me shortly after inviting me to speak at Career Day. I said yes, because it's time my daughter and every child in that classroom learns that success doesn't always look like a sleek corner office with glass walls. Sometimes it looks like a mom in sneakers, clipboard in hand, leading a team with heart and grit, showing up not to prove herself, but simply because she can. If you've read this far, if this story feels like your story, the one where you've been underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed, I hope you hear this. You don't need anyone's permission to rise. You only need the courage to keep going. And if this message resonates with you, if it reminds you of your own quiet victories or fuels that spark to keep building your path, I'd be honored if you stayed connected. A simple like or subscribing to this channel helps these stories find others who might need them too. Sometimes just knowing you're not alone can make all the difference. Thank you for walking this journey with me. Your moment is coming.